Well, if you've been wondering how you could bring storytelling into your presentations, your speeches, and transform your talks, then you definitely want to grab a notebook, hush the kids, and put on your headphones as I interview award-winning and best-selling author Stephen James on this edition of Reality Coaching for Writers. No fluff, just the real stuff to help you succeed. Stephen, welcome. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about your soon-to-be-released book that you've co-authored with Tom Morrissey,
Yes.
The Art of the Tale.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Actually, Tom and I talked about the idea for it years ago, and then over the pandemic, sort of it gelled and came together. It's the first time I've ever written a book with someone, and I'm thankful we're still friends at the end. So it turned out fine for us, but I'm really excited about the book, and I think it'll be helpful for a lot of different types of speakers and presenters, storytellers, and so on.
Well, and Eddie and I are all about putting resources into the hands of writers. So we're very excited about this. Of course, you've been well published. You have over 40 books to your credit. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess it's like 56 now or
Whoa.
something like that, but it's just a
Okay.
long,
And how many of those
time of writing. So
yeah, how many of those are psychological thrillers? I had a count of 18, but
I think it's 18.
okay.
Yeah.
And then you've also published two other writing resource books, Story, Trump Structure, and Troubleshooting Your Novel, right?
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and yeah.
And for those that don't know, you have a master's in storytelling, a master's degree, right?
Right back from, I think 97 is when I finished it. Seems like another life ago. I can't believe it's been 25 years ago, but yeah, I did get a degree in storytelling. And at the time, there was only one college in the world that offered that here in Tennessee. And so I had moved down with my family, young daughters and my wife, and started the program and chopped away at it for a year and finally finished it up. But no, it was helpful. And I feel like one of the interesting things for me has been I studied story and storytelling. I've written books on writing. I've read probably dozens or if not hundreds of books on the craft of writing, screenplays, and so on. But for the art of the tale, I actually came up with a new theory of what makes a story work. So it took me almost 30 years to come up with. I must be pretty slow or so, I don't know what, but anyway, I have this new, entirely kind of new theory that I talk about in the art of the tale that I think will really help people no matter what genre they might write in or tell stories in, however long it is, whether it's a screenplay they might write or a speech they might give. I feel like this new format, I guess I would say, will be helpful for them.
Well, great.
Yeah.
That really excites me because we just recently talked about creative nonfiction and how powerful storytelling is, even in the, Christian living titles and how-to books that the nonfiction writer writes. So, and I think that recently I took a masterclass with a coach, Dr. Darius Daniels, and he talked about the difference between an informational speaker and a transformational speaker. And the difference is storytelling because it touches the heart. And you have a better chance at helping your audience transform an area of their life and stepping up to a better level when you touch their heart with story.
Well, stories do more than just inform people. And I think the best instructors, teachers, keynote speakers, and so on understand that instinctively, maybe. But there's a lot of research, behind that to support that idea. When we hear a story that we're really engaged with, we actually begin to trust the storyteller more. and trust what they have to say more, we also experience the same types of feelings or emotions that characters in the story might be experiencing. So it can touch people on a deeper level than just giving them facts. It actually can touch their hearts and heads and minds and all, kind of throughout all of
I love that. I love that. So tell us, what makes a good story?
that. Well, what makes a good story, I feel like all stories have four elements to them. Like every story. Like if you're missing one of these four, you don't have a story, you have something else.
Oh,
But,
okay.
but great stories have two additional things. So I'll talk through real quick. Basically on the cover of the book, you can see there's a cube. So there's this idea of a story cubes. So the first is a character. You clearly have to have a character if you're going to have a story. Um, and there's different aspects of character we could talk about, but the second is setting in time and place. So it's a geotemporal. It's in location, in time, and in space. And so you have a character we care about in a setting that matters. Then you give them a struggle to overcome something and a pursuit. Those are the first four. So every story will have a character, a setting, a struggle, and a pursuit. If your story doesn't have one of those, it might not be a story yet. If you just have a story about stuff that happens to someone, but there's no struggle,
Mm-hmm.
or there's no pursuit where they try to accomplish, obtain, overcome, revenge something, you might not have a story yet. So I think it's helpful for those of us who might tell stories or even write stories, nonfiction or fiction, whatever, is to look at each scene, look at its the story as a whole, and say, does it have a character we care about? Does
Mm-hmm.
it have a struggle that's intimate? Does it have a pursuit where their choices matter and make a difference? And does it have a setting that we can picture? All of those are really helpful. Then the last two elements that make great stories are, which, so that's those six sides really of, they form a cube really, those six sides. So the fifth is the pivot, what I call the pivot. It's kind of, you might say it's kind of like a twist, or it could be a twist, but it's where the story goes into a direction you hadn't anticipated. But when it goes there, you appreciate, you're like, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And so, sorry about
That's okay.
that. And so the story pivots. If you don't have a pivot, it's too predictable.
Yeah.
So pivot makes sense, like it's logical and believable, but it's also something where it's unexpected. So it has to have both aspects, unexpected and inevitable, a pivot. And then the final element is payoff. It has to pay off. If it's a scary story, it has to make us afraid. If it's a funny story, we have to laugh. What's the payoff of the story? And the pivot and the payoff can come at the same time, in the same moment, in the last sentence of a story. So think
Oh,
of a short
wow.
story with a twist at the end. The twist at the end might be a pivot where you're like, that's amazing. I never thought of that. Wow, I'll never forget this story. And it contains the payoff. So you don't need super long stories to have all six elements, but to have all six elements within your story will improve it.
That's great. Yes. We've been going over in some of our episodes, Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 of story. And we just discussed not too long ago about satisfactory endings.
Mm.
And I like when they surprise me, because reading as many manuscripts as I do and having a voracious appetite for new fiction, it's hard to surprise me. It really is. So
Yeah,
I'm always
good.
delighted when a writer does that. So you had mentioned in the book that you should never tell the same story twice. So why is that?
Well, we say never tell the same story twice because it isn't that you can never tell that story again once you told it once, but you'll never tell it in exactly the same way
Oh, okay.
because you'll be in a different place. Your
Right.
audience will be in a different place. And we really believe that there are four elements that should all work together to form your delivery of your story. Okay, so you as the storyteller, your
Hmm.
gifts, abilities, interests, and so on, the story itself, the content, the mood of the story, so that will affect how it's delivered. And then the third is the context, like when and where it's being told. Is it over a conversation or on a stage? And finally, the audience. So the audience really should be a huge factor when you're developing a story. And you might say, well, yeah, I'm going to tell the same story, but I have a completely different audience. It's a different expectations, different context, different event. So the story will naturally be a little bit different then.
Right.
Um, and so delivery really, I think, of great storytellers takes all four of those factors into consideration: the teller, the story, the context, and the audience.
That reminds me of why the word of God never gets old. It's the different deliveries we hear from the different pulpits and the different uh, people presenting the story, and showing a different aspect of it to a different audience. And I love whenever I hear someone present uh, the story of Hosea and Gomer, for instance, the way Francine Rivers did in Redeeming Love. And it's taking that story, but it's extrapolating it and putting it in a more, setting that today's audience would totally get. And it's powerful. It's powerful. So yeah, I love that. That's really
Yeah,
great.
in one of the seminars I did one time for pastors, I said, okay, so you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell the story of Jesus's life,
Mm-hmm.
but they all tell it differently.
They do.
And so I said to these pastors, which one is right? And they're like, well, they're all right. I said, yes, because they were all told to a different audience from a different storyteller with a different context. And it isn't that they're meant to contradict each other, but they're meant to complement each other. And so when we tell stories, whatever types they might be, as you mentioned, they might be a biblical story, but as we tell it, we are doing the same thing. We're trying to tell it to a new audience today, and tell it in a way that resonates with them. And so it may be that we change the wording or whatever, but that's because we are different storytellers telling to a different audience in a different context, but the same story, but just told
Right.
different ways.
Right. Wow. Now you've received several honors from the storytelling. What group is that?
Well, I did tell a story at the National Storytelling Festival, International Storytelling Festival, on their Story Slam stage a couple of years ago. So that was kind of cool to do. I did win the South Carolina Liars Contest a couple of years ago. So I was, for a year, the official liar of South Carolina, even though I live in Tennessee. So that was kind of fun. I got to be the official liar of a state that I didn't live in.
Were there appearances throughout the year that you had to? Uh,
No, nothing like that. But it was still fun to be a part of. It's a fun organization, um, I guess organization or whatever that puts it on each year, and there's some good stories with that. So and then I've won different awards for some of my books on story and storytelling and so on like that. But the point is, really we want the story, this book to be super practical, right, for
yes.
people.
Yes.
And so it isn't just theoretical as far as like what a story is, or it's just like, okay, in the trenches, nuts and bolts, here's how to improve your story. Here's how to add humor to it, to transform your talks, to avoid mistakes people make, and like all of those types of aspects of speaking.
That's great. So actually, this is almost aimed to the a business book audience, right?
Well,
Leadership and
I
those
think,
in
yeah, a lot
leadership.
of a lot of business leaders will really benefit from the book. Tom's background, he's been a corporate communications expert and specialist for about 30 years. So he's written speeches for Fortune 50 companies for decades. And so his background is really in the corporate world. Mine is more storytelling,
Right.
but
So
we
you,
alternated chapters, so he would write
oh,
one,
okay.
and then I would write the next chapter. And that way, he could address some of the aspects that might be really helpful for business leaders. And then I could look at sort of the practical elements of storytelling for whatever audience it is you might be speaking to. So I feel like it'll be really helpful for leaders, but also for teachers, educators, for keynote speakers, podcasters, really anyone with a story to tell.
Right, right. Well, and you give, is it 4 keys to good storytelling? Is there one in particular you can share with us?
Well, I think there's different chapters where we, touch on different specific
Okay.
elements of storytelling. But I would say, just off the top of my head, like one, um, like really helpful hint or tip is, yes, you'll prepare, but also respond. So it's really important to be ready
Yeah.
to adapt your story to the audience. So let's say you're speaking and telling your story, and maybe things are like maybe not going quite like you hoped. Well, you can shrink it up maybe if you need to, or add a little more action or excitement or intrigue, mystery, or something like that. But if you just plow through and you say, I'm going to memorize a story, you memorize it, and the audience may not feel as connected to it. But if you're ready to adapt, so we don't tell people to memorize their stories. We really ask you to, I guess, internalize the story might be a way to say it, so that you really get to know the layout of the story, so that you can adapt it to that audience that day.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It
Yeah.
really does. Now, so I was going to ask you a little bit about the co-authoring experience. And you said you did every other chapter. Whose idea was it to write this book? Was it yours, Tom's, or the publisher's?
Well, it was my idea. I reached out to Tom. I knew about his background, and both of us have written thrillers. Both of us have written novels for many years, and but I knew of his speech writing and corporate communication skills, and I just thought it would be a unique perspective. No business book or no really storytelling book has ever come from the perspective of a speechwriter in the
Mm-hmm.
corporate world and a storyteller. Um, and so I thought this might be fascinating. Well, publisher was really interested, HarperCollins, and so we ended up working, and it was a little more work than we thought. We both thought, well, we've taught storytelling for years, for decades. We've done this all over the world. We've taught thousands and thousands of different, leaders and teachers and writers and so on. How hard can it be to write the book? But it actually was a bit more work than we thought. But we're really happy with the way it turned out, and we actually got to read the audiobook.
Oh,
So here,
awesome.
I read my chapters, and Tom read the ones that he had written. So we actually set up here in where I am right now in my basement, set up a recording studio, a portable recording studio, and recorded the book. So it's got a good close personal connection to both of us. We tell some personal stories in the book, and it was fascinating, challenging, but we both really, I think, trust each other so
Good.
much that
Yeah.
it's been a positive experience. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. I love it. Like I said, now it's available for pre-order right now, and the release date is the 30th of August. Is that
Yes.
correct?
30th
The
of August.
official, but it's up for pre-order, and I highly recommend it. You're getting 2 veterans that know what they're talking about, and yeah, it's going to be a great resource for so many. Stephen, I think the pandemic
Mhm.
took a lot of people that were, um, teaching in conference settings or,
Mhm.
and expanded all of our reach. I mean, here Eddie and I are doing this podcast, and so many others are as well. And so it's the timing is perfect for this type of thing. It really is. It's
Well, I
great.
mean, there's a big difference between telling stories to a live audience while you're in person and doing it over a video
Yeah.
call and so on. So there are challenges to each, of course. It's a little bit
Mhm.
different, but the principles, I think, really we do kind of talk through how to do it effectively, whether it's online or live and in person.
That's great. And I think what you said about adapting to each particular audience is really important, because it's going to switch it up. Your delivery is going to change for each particular audience. I have one more question. We're going to be so quickly out of time, but when I talk to nonfiction writers, I ask them what promise they're making the reader, and how they plan on delivering that promise. And it's so important for a nonfiction reader to deliver on the promise, just like you had mentioned earlier. What is the main point that you're hoping would be the takeaway in this, but like the dream takeaway that you're hoping the reader will grab a hold of?
Well, I think everyone is a storyteller. Some people are more comfortable, say, having a conversation over coffee and telling stories about the day. Some people are more comfortable on stage in front of 1,000 people. And I think getting to know yourself and where you're most comfortable, and embracing the fact that you are already a storyteller and that you can improve your skills, maybe to step out on out of your comfort zone and maybe to improve, build on the strengths that you have. So I would say, the takeaway would be embrace the fact that you're a storyteller, improve in your storytelling,
Yeah.
and connect more with your audiences as you tell the stories that matter most to you.
And like Nike says, just do it, right? Just start to do it. I think that's great. So personal question, what's your personal all-time favorite story, and who wrote it?
Oh, wow. My all-time favorite story and who
Or
wrote it.
maybe the one that got you started, the one that inspired you to become a professional storyteller.
Well, I think the fun thing is, when I was a kid, my uncle would tell us stories. And so I fell in love with stories and storytelling because whenever we would get together for Thanksgiving or New Year's, Christmas, and so on, he would take the kids into a corner of the room and he would tell us stories. And so what happened then, it kind of inspired me to pursue imagination, creativity, and making up my own little stories, as a kid. And so it wasn't that his stories were ever written down, but they were just shared with us, and that probably inspired me, I think, the most. Yeah.
I think that's great. And do you say with confidence that we're all storytellers because just living life provides us with stories, would you say? Or where do you get your ideas for your stories? And it's I saw that you had an article on Sunday school teacher writes horror or something like that. I saw a
I
post.
don't know. I don't know. I don't know what that is. You'll have to send me a link to that because I'm not
Okay,
sure
I
what
will.
that is. So let's see. You asked a couple of questions.
I did. I'm
Um,
sorry. I just
it's okay. But remind me, what's the first thing you wanted me to tackle?
so you well, boy, okay. I pulled back up my notes because I just shut them down after I threw that all at you. Okay, we
That's
asked
fine.
about your who inspired you, and you said your uncle. And then, is there any particular story though that you wanted your children to read, that you share when you teach, as an example of excellent storytelling? Let's go with that question.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, a lot of stories are a little long to do in a quick interview like this, but
Sure.
let me just tell you a quick story that
Okay.
has all 6 elements that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And so it's a short story. It's an old teaching story from the Middle East, and it's about this man who felt like he wanted people to show him more attention, to care for him more. And so one day he was out in the jungle and he looked around, saw a fox with no legs. And he thought, that's strange, a fox with no legs. I've never seen that before. And then he looked over and saw a tiger who was finishing his meal. And the tiger dragged some meat over and gave it to the fox to eat. Well, the man thought, that's pretty odd. I wonder if that would happen again. So the next day he went back to see, sure enough, there was the fox. And after finishing his meal, the tiger brought some meat over and left it for the fox. So a third day came and the man said, okay, I've got to see if it's going to happen at all again. Sure enough, same thing. So the man said, I think I've figured out what this means. So he went home and he waited for someone to come and bring him some food.
Oh,
He waited and he waited and no one showed him any attention. No one came and shared any food with him until finally he was starving. He was literally on death's door. And he heard this voice, the voice of God that spoke to him and said, don't you even understand? You were supposed to be the tiger.
whoa, that's good.
So the story has a character, his struggle, his pursuit, his setting, and then there's a pivot at the end where you realize that, serving others is
Mm.
actually a way to fulfillment instead of just being served by them. And then so there's payoff and pivot in the last line that come together. So it's a short story, but it carries a lot of impact. And I feel like um it's just a powerful little parable or
No, that's
fable.
great.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end this time. Stephen, you are you still doing retreats?
Yes, we are
Okay.
still doing some retreats, and actually we have a writers conference. I think we're going to be doing in November here in
Okay.
Tennessee. So if anyone would like details, it'll be in Johnson City, I think the first weekend of November. But you could email us at info@stephenjames.net, Stephen with a V.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly where the website will be, but start there, get on the list. It's going to be a limited number of people, really
Okay.
small, intimate, kind of a boutique writers
Oh,
conference.
nice. Those are the best kinds. One-on-one attention and also I'll put in our link, Stephen's website where you can
Oh,
go and
sure.
find out more. And he posts events and conferences that he'll be speaking at there. And I'll grab the retreat link as well and put that in there for us. But Stephen, it has been fabulous having you here with us today. I do want to tell our listening audience, Eddie took the day off, so he will be back next week. And he issued us a challenge that we've turned into a writing contest. And it's
Uh-huh.
a 300-word write your own obituary. So the deadline is August 6th. Send it to writerscoach.us@gmail.com. And there will be prizes. So send us your obituary, your own obituary, 300 words. And thank you again, Stephen. And we wish you so well on this book launch. And thank you again for being faithful to provide us good writing resources.
Well, we appreciate it, and thanks so much for the chance to be here.
Well,
Take
thank
care.
you. Have a great day. Give your family our love.
Okay.
Bye, Stephen.
Bye.